It isn't just a series of failed experiments. It was a 3-ton execution. How did the most advanced military on Earth, a force capable of splitting the atom and projecting power across 2 oceans, find itself utterly defeated by a simple bolt of fabric? Why did a system built to conquer the world surrender to a jeep falling from the clouds? And why did the men meant to be safe become the first casualties of a math problem the experts claimed was impossible to solve? But history was looking at the wrong battlefield. The cameras were focused on the heavy steel of the Pentagon, while the real war was being fought with needles and thread. They missed the women in the New England mills who saw what the generals couldn't or wouldn't. They ignored the only warning that mattered, coming from a woman the Air Corps dismissed as unskilled labor. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. July 12, 1942, Manchester, Connecticut. The air inside the Pioneer Parachute Company is thick, not just with the sweltering humidity of a New England summer, but with the smell of scorched nylon and the heavy metallic scent of failure. The factory floor hums with the rhythmic, aggressive clatter of hundreds of sewing machines, a mechanical heartbeat that never seems to slow. Outside, on the testing grounds, another 3-ton Jeep is being loaded into the belly of a C-47 transport plane. This is the 4th test this week. The previous 3 ended in what the military reports coldly call total hull loss. In Washington, the high-ranking officials of the Air Corps are growing desperate. They view the problem through the lens of brute force. To them, a parachute is just a larger version of a handkerchief. Their logic is simple. If the Jeep is heavy, make the handkerchief bigger. If it still falls too fast, make it out of thicker silk. They are fighting a war against physics with a manual written for toys. The mechanic of death here is a black box of kinetic energy. When a 3-ton mass drops from a cargo bay, it doesn't just fall, it accelerates until the atmosphere itself becomes a wall. When the parachute deploys, the opening shock is like a car crash at 100 miles per hour. The nylon doesn't just stretch, it disintegrates. The friction of the air against the canopy creates enough heat to melt the very fibers meant to hold it together. It's like trying to stop a charging bull with a lace curtain. And the curtain is catching fire. The lead engineer on site, a man whose uniform is as stiff as his convictions, lowers his binoculars as the plane reaches altitude. He has already calculated the failure. He has the graphs. He has the slide rules. He believes that if the math says it's impossible, then the machine is the problem, not the design. Drop, he commands. The Jeep leaves the bay, a moment of absolute heart-stopping silence. Then the crack of silk under tension. It sounds like a gunshot echoing over the valley. The canopy doesn't bloom. It shreds into white ribbons that dance uselessly in the wind as 3 tons of American steel screams toward the earth, burying itself 4 feet into the dirt with a bone-shaking thud that rattles the windows of the factory. The engineer doesn't flinch. He turns to his colleagues with a look of cold, clinical finality. "The math is settled," he says, his voice a reconstruction of the prevailing hubris of the era. "A Jeep cannot fly. Gravity is a law, and fabric is a suggestion. We are wasting our time on a miracle that isn't coming." He treats the failure of the fabric as a ceiling of human capability, but he has fatally underestimated the women standing in the shadows of the factory floor. While the men in suits calculate the cost of the wreckage, Adeline Gray stands by her sewing machine. She is 24 years old, a master of a craft the draft boards call domestic work. She isn't looking at the wreckage of the Jeep. She is looking at the tattered remains of the last canopy, laid out on a long wooden table. She doesn't see a mathematical impossibility. She sees a flaw in the weave. She sees the way the horizontal threads were strangled by the vertical ones, creating hot spots where the fabric simply gave up. While the system screams in panic over lost equipment and broken deadlines, Adeline is already moving into the quiet of the evening shift, holding the silence that will eventually catch the weight of the world. She knows that the generals are looking for strength in thickness when they should be looking for strength in flexibility. The engineer scoffs at the quiet corners of the mill, believing the problem is one of chemistry that only a man in a lab can solve. He treats the silence of the women as submission, but he has fatally underestimated his opponent. It isn't surrender, it's the calm before a storm of innovation that will rewrite the rules of the sky. While the directors toast to their improved heavy-duty designs in the officers' club, a microscopic fracture, the true master of the sky, is already preparing to unzip their latest canopy, ready to remind them that in the battle against gravity, arrogance is the heaviest burden of all. Inside the Manchester mill, the air has turned into a heavy, suffocating soup. The rhythmic thump hiss of the steam presses and the relentless clack, clack, clack of the steel needles create a symphony of industrial labor. A sound the military brass considers the background noise of the home front. But in the center of this heat, a quiet rebellion is taking shape. Adeline Gray and her team of master seamstresses are no longer just following the blueprints sent down from the Air Corps. Those blueprints, thick, rigid, and obsessed with reinforcement, have become a map to nowhere. Every time a reinforced canopy hits the wind, the heavy seams act like fault lines in an earthquake. They don't strengthen the fabric. They give the wind a place to grip and tear. The establishment remains obsessed with the idea of a shield. They want the parachute to be a solid wall that pushes back against the sky. But Adeline knows something the generals don't. She knows that a wall is only as strong as its weakest brick. And in the sky, every brick is a potential point of failure. She stands over a vast cutting table, her fingers tracing the grain of a new bolt of high-tensile nylon. To a general, this is just supplies. To Adeline, it's a living geometry. While the system is screaming for more mass, Adeline is looking for more space. She begins to experiment with a radical, interlocking cross-weave pattern, a technique she didn't learn in a ballistics lab, but at the foot of her mother's sewing chair. She stops treating the parachute as a flat sheet of cloth. Instead, she begins to envision it as a complex load-bearing ribcage. She understands the black box of structural failure. In the old designs, the weight of the Jeep pulled on the center of the fabric, causing the edges to flap and eventually shred. It was a fatal flaw born of linear thinking. Adeline's solution is to distribute the load through a series of interlocking ribs made of reinforced nylon tape. Instead of the air hitting the fabric like a fist hitting a wall, the air would be caught, channeled, and cradled. It is the logic of a corset applied to a 3-ton tank. But the path to this breakthrough is paved with professional contempt. One afternoon, a Colonel Miller, a man who measures progress in tonnage and maps, walks through the factory. He stops at Adeline's table. He looks at the intricate, lattice-like webbing she is carefully pinning into place. He doesn't see a revolution in physics. He sees a woman fiddling with embroidery. "We need a parachute that can hold a truck, Miss Gray," he says, his voice dripping with the effortless condescension of the era. "Not a decorative doily. Stick to the manual." The engineers at Wright Field didn't spend 3 years on these specs for you to start improving them with dressmaking tricks. He treats her innovation as a distraction, a feminine whim in a world of masculine steel. He believes the manual is a Bible, and any deviation is a sin. But he has fatally underestimated the ghost in the machine. While he orders more of the old, failing canopies to be produced, Adeline and her team begin working in the shadows of the late-night shift. While the experts are at the officers' club, the women are in the dark, hand-stitching the prototypes that the system said were impossible. The military establishment scoffed at the quiet whispers on the factory floor, believing the war would be won by the loudest voices and the heaviest hammers. They treated the silence of the seamstresses as simple obedience. But it wasn't obedience. It was the calm before a storm of terminal velocity. They had forgotten that gravity doesn't care about rank, and the sky was about to punish their pride with a 3-ton reminder of who was really in charge of the descent. The internal struggle for Adeline is a constant, grinding friction. Every time she deviates from the official specs, she is risking her job, her reputation, and the very safety of the men she's trying to save. She feels the weight of every failed test in her own bones. Yes, she could follow the orders and produce a standard parachute, but she knows that doing so is simply signing a death warrant for the paratroopers of the 101st. She remembers the way a dress hangs on a mannequin, how the weight must be supported by the shoulders, not the waist. She applies this cognitive bridge, the eureka moment, where the domestic meets the deadly. She realizes that the Jeep's weight needs to be suspended from a central spine of webbing that radiates outward like the silk of a spider's web. A spider web doesn't break because it is thick. It survives because it is perfectly balanced and infinitely flexible. But as the prototypes are finished, the resistance personification returns. Colonel Miller discovers the unauthorized canopies. "This is a violation of military contract," he barks, slamming a hand onto the cutting table. "You've wasted thousands of dollars in material on a design that hasn't been approved by a single ballistic expert. We don't have time for theories. We need equipment." Adeline doesn't look down. She doesn't apologize. She simply points to the crate of shredded standard parachutes in the corner. "The experts built those," she says, her voice a calm, sharp blade. "And those are the ones that are currently buried 4 feet in the Connecticut soil. This one will fly." It is a moment of crystallized arrogance. The colonel looks at the reinforced, interlocking ribcage of the cargo parachute. He sees dressmaking. Adeline sees the future of airborne warfare. He orders the design to be scrapped. He believes that unskilled hands have no place in the high science of war. But as the invasion of Europe looms, the failure rate of the heavy drop tests reaches a breaking point. The system is failing, and the panic is starting to set in at the highest levels of the Pentagon. They are standing on the edge of a tactical suicide. They are about to drop thousands of men into the dark with no way to get them the heavy guns they need to survive. The hubris of the armor for the sky approach has led them into a dead end. While the generals scream into their telephones, demanding a solution from the labs, Adeline Gray is already at the testing airfield. She has smuggled one of her ribcage canopies into the cargo bay of a C-47. She isn't waiting for permission anymore. She knows that the only way to prove a miracle is to make it happen before the world realizes it was supposed to be impossible. September 17th, 1944. The sky over the Netherlands. The air is no longer a transparent void. It is a chaotic, screaming canvas of olive drab and white. Thousands of feet above the flooded fields of Eindhoven and Nijmegen, the C-47 transport planes groan under the weight of an impossible ambition. Operation Market Garden. This is the moment the experts feared. This is the gamble the Pentagon nearly abandoned. Down in the cargo bays, the crews are sweating, their hands slick against the cold steel of the 3-ton jeeps and the heavy 75mm pack howitzers. These machines are the lifeblood of the airborne. Without them, the paratroopers below are just targets waiting for the German panzers to arrive. The signal light turns green. The drop is no longer a test in Connecticut. It is the heartbeat of the Allied front. As the heavy equipment is pushed into the abyss, we enter the time freeze. The jeep hits the slipstream. For a heartbeat, it is weightless. A 3-ton ghost suspended between life and a crater. Then the static line pulls taut. In the old world, the world of the high science manuals, this is where the metal screams. This is where the opening shock would shred the fabric like wet tissue paper. But as the ribcage canopy unfurls, something different happens. The air doesn't hit a wall. It enters a sanctuary. The interlocking crossweave that Adeline Gray stitched in the dead of night begins to work. You can almost hear the nylon breathe. As the force of the drop hits the fabric, the load-bearing tapes, those dressmaking tricks, act like the vaulted arches of a cathedral. They shunt the kinetic energy away from the center, distributing the violent shock along the ribs of the canopy. The black box of terminal velocity is finally solved. The tension moves through the threads like water through a delta, dissipating the heat and the friction before they can reach the breaking point. The canopy doesn't snap, it pulses. And then the bloom, a massive reinforced white flower, opens against the gray Dutch sky. The 3-ton machine, once a plummeting executioner, settles into a steady, rhythmic descent. It is no longer a falling rock. It is a cradled cargo. Down on the ground, the paratroopers of the 101st look up. They see the armor they were told would never come. They see the guns that will keep them alive. The tanks hit the earth with a controlled thud, their engines roaring to life within seconds. The miracle has landed. But as the battle rages toward the bridge at Arnhem, the victory at the Manchester Mill begins to sour. The system, the great unyielding machine of the military-industrial complex, has a very short memory for the unskilled. As the success of the cargo parachute becomes the new standard for global warfare, the names of the women who designed it are quietly, systematically erased. In the official technical manuals of 1945, The ribcage design isn't credited to Adeline Gray or her team of master seamstresses. Instead, it is attributed to the design bureau of the pioneer parachute company and the corporate patents of the very men who mocked it. The bitter aftertaste of this victory is found in the silence of the archives. The women were returned to their domestic status. Their innovation was absorbed into the machine, their names replaced by serial numbers and corporate logos. The generals took the medals, the corporations took the royalties, and the women, they were simply given another bolt of fabric and told to keep their heads down. We look at the modern world today, at the massive heavy drop capabilities of the 21st century, and we see only the steel. We see the high-tech sensors and the reinforced alloys. We forget that the survival of the Allied front once hung by a literal thread, a thread hand-stitched by women who saw the impossible and fixed it while the experts were busy explaining why it couldn't be done. Do we see this same hubris in our society today? We live in an era of the expert, where we often prioritize the degree over the craft and the rank over the reality. We ignore the ghost in the machine, the quiet frontline workers who see the flaws in our massive, rigid systems, because they are the ones who actually have to touch the fabric of our world. The cost of negligence is always paid in blood, but the price of arrogance is the loss of our greatest innovators. Adeline Gray's ribcage still flies every time a relief crate drops into a disaster zone or a vehicle descends into a conflict. Her genius is everywhere, yet her name is nowhere. The bitter victory is that the machine worked, but the machine didn't deserve her. If you believe that stories like Adeline Gray's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing. Your support ensures these forgotten truths don't fade into the silence of the archives. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.